So I did my presentation on An Anthropologist on Mars by Oliver Sacks. So the book is broken up into 7 chapters, and each chapter is about a different person with a psychological disorder. And so the first chapter is about a painter who suddenly becomes colorblind, and then sort of how he deals with that and like making work. And he can't see color anymore, but he can see the different wavelengths of light. And so he has trouble adjusting to the world because most people can't perceive that normally, and so he can sort of like paint that and visualize that for everybody else. The second chapter is about a hippie who slowly loses the ability to create short-term memory, and so he's basically stuck in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and so he can learn new things like a musical instrument, but he can't make new short-term memories. So it's all about like how he deals with that. The third chapter is about a man who grew up with Tourette syndrome, but still became a surgeon. And so he, although he has like tics and movements and things that he needs to do, when he becomes a surgeon, when he's doing surgery, he no longer has those anymore. Sort of that weird disconnect. Like he doesn't have the disease while he's operating. The fourth chapter is about a man who grew up blind, and through a simple surgery gained sight, but he had no visual intelligence, no visual ability to like understand visual information, and so he slowly loses his sight, and like his perception of the world and his perception of himself because he just can't understand the world visually. The fifth chapter is about a painter who paints his memories of his childhood, like hometown in Italy, and he has these like incredible hallucinations where he can sort of like not only see the village, but he can like touch the walls and he can smell the grass or the world, and he can hear things, and so he's also able to paint this, and so he can sort of like show his hallucinations to everybody else. And then there's a lot about how he returns to the city, to the town he grew up in, and it's changed and how that changes the way he paints after that. The sixth chapter is about a young boy who is very autistic, but he can draw incredibly well, and so he has a great visual memory, and he can see a building at a glance and then draw it on paper minutes later or hours later or weeks later. But he can also capture like the essence of something, so he can capture the essence of a Matisse painting or building or scenery. But he has no sort of like emotional personal intelligence, and he can't really connect with people and with his art. The idea that is he creating these beautiful things for just like going through the motions, or does he have some sort of like connection to drawing? And then the final chapter is also about an autistic person, but she's self-reflexive, so she can like explain her life and explain her experiences being autistic, which is not common in autistic people. And so Sachs talks to her and tries to like understand what she understands. So the chapters are sort of structured similarly, and so Sachs talks about either how the patient came to the ailment or their life up until he met them. And then he explains his meeting with the person and his like initial perceptions, and he goes into detail about the disease or the ailment or whatever it is. But then he also talks about his visit, and so Sachs inserts himself into the story, and he talks about the people during his sort of like multiple visits to their homes and their lives. But he also adds sort of a scientific and a historic perspective, and so he talks about historic cases of people who have similar ailments or diseases, and how they lived and how like they were tested for different things, and how that turned out for them, as well as for like the main character of each chapter. So Sachs is all about his experience. He writes about like how he perceives these people and how he interacted with them. He inserts himself into the story, of course, as we sat at the table versus like Bennett was sitting at the table talking to his kids. It was all about like Sachs was in it as well. But then he also takes a step back and talks about the scientific processes of some of these disorders, and he explains in incredible detail. It does create sort of like a distance between himself and the reader, because most readers don't have just like the vast knowledge about psychology as he does. But he brings back the element of the person into each chapter, and so the reader is able to connect with that person, if not through the science. And so my writing exercise is to talk to a stranger or somebody you don't really know in their natural habitat. So in their home or in their workplace, you have them explain their life to you, and sort of like how they grew up and how they came to where they are. But then like write down what you notice about them, like their habits and their tics, something just like that they do, and then analyze what that would mean. So what they talked about and the behaviors and like how they move their hands and stuff, what might that mean about them as a person? Because Sachs did it very like scientific about their disorders, but I think it could be done very interestingly just about like a normal everyday person. And then if you wanted to go really detailed, you could talk to friends and family and see what they notice about that person, about their behaviors and their sort of like thoughts and tics in life.